Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Zurich Salon. My name is Mo Lovett. I work for the Academy of Ideas in London, and I will be our chairperson for this evening. The event this evening, as you all know, is 1 year on Israel, Gaza, and anti-Semitism. Now, October the 7th, 2023, was a moment that not only shocked the world, but also divided the world. For some, it was the largest pogrom against the Jewish people since the Holocaust. For others, it was an act of Palestinian resistance in a much longer war, and there were very many different opinions in between, and of course, we have that on our panel this evening. And then, of course, came Israel's retaliation, with people divided on whether the nation had a right to defend itself or whether it was a disproportionate response against a civilian population in Gaza. So, of course, this is an incredibly heated discussion, and that discussion has played out on the streets of Europe and North America as well. And there have been arrests, and there have been attacks, and there have been racist attacks on both sides. In universities, events have been cancelled, and people's free speech has been denied. Now, at the Zurich Salon, we are very much in favour of free speech. And what that means is that not only do we have a variety of views from our panels up here, but that we will devote a lot of time to you, the audience, for your views as well. You don't just have to ask a question, you can make points and you can make comments, you can disagree with our speakers, I hope civilly. And an important point, I think, about debate and free speech is that we allow people to have their say. So I'm going to ask the speakers, who I will introduce in a moment, to speak for 6 to 7 minutes each. And gentlemen, I will be tight on timing. I will give you 1 minute's notice before you're to finish. And if you overrun, I will shut you up. How about that? I would ask you in the audience and each other to allow those speakers to speak uninterrupted for 6 to 7 minutes because, of course, you will all have your say. So I hope that's clear. Now, I'm going to introduce our speakers in the order in which they are speaking. First of all, on my far left, we have Thomas Farsi, who is a journalist, author and writer, especially known as a columnist for Unheard magazine and as a contributing editor at Compact magazine. And his most recent book, which is very interesting, is The COVID Consensus, The Global Assault on Democracy and the Poor, a Critique from the Left. Next, I will be asking Dominic Foisy to speak. Dominic is the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of Nebelspalter. Previously, Dominic worked for the Swiss Parliament, first as a lobbyist and then as a journalist, and in 2022 he was awarded the Röpke Prize for Civil Society, so welcome to you, Dominic. Then we will hear from Stefan Ziegler, who is a documentary producer. His Geneva-based company, Advocacy Productions, makes films about international law and the power of film in humanitarian diplomacy. Stefan also lived in East Jerusalem and Gaza for many years, working for the ICRC and for UNRWA. So welcome to you, Stefan. Last but not least, we have Daniel Ben-Ami, who is also a journalist and an author and creator of the project Radicalism of Fools on rethinking anti-Semitism. Daniel has contributed to many publications, and his books include, most recently, Ferraris for All in Defense of Economic Progress. Please can we welcome our speakers. Thank you very much. Thomas, over to you.
Thank you, Mo. And of course, a big thanks to the organisers for setting up this brave and much needed debate. And of course, thanks to you for being here tonight. First of all, a little legal disclaimer. I will be speaking in a strictly personal capacity tonight, so not on behalf of any of the organisations that I work for. Having said that, let me also say that I've been doing events like this for about 15 years now, as a writer, a journalist, and an activist. I've probably written thousands of speeches like this one, and yet this has been by far the hardest speech I've ever had to write. Not only because I have very strong feelings about this topic, as I'm sure all the speakers here tonight do, but even more importantly because as much as I commend and applaud the organizers for their commitment to open debate and free speech at a time when free speech is under a severe attack, especially here in the West, I fear that we've reached a point where the public discussion in the West has reached a point where debates like this, I'm afraid, aren't likely to have much of an impact on the recipient audience, in this case, you. And what I mean by that is that opinions on this matter and on this topic have become so entrenched, so polarized, that I have serious doubts that anyone who's here tonight is likely to go home with a different opinion from the one they had when they walked into this room. So if you're a firm believer in the justness of the Palestinian cause, you're unlikely to be swayed by any of the arguments that the pro-Israeli speakers will make tonight. And by the same token, if you're a firm Israel supporter, you're unlikely to be swayed by any of my arguments, which is why I struggled so much to write this. I thought a lot about the best way to convey the feelings of anguish and pain and suffering and powerlessness that I've been feeling this past year. First watching the horrible October 7 attack unfold, and then the horrific events in Gaza, and now in Lebanon that followed, and which of course continue as we speak. And I especially struggled to come up with the best way to convey my feelings to those who, don't share them. So to those of you who feel that everything that has happened over the past year is justified or acceptable in some way, the slaughter of tens of thousands of Palestinians, 40,000 according to the official estimates, of which 14,000 are children, up to nearly 200,000, or 10% of the Gazan population, according to a recent estimate by The Lancet, which, as I'm sure you all know, is the world's most prestigious medical journal, along with the complete annihilation of any life-supporting structure in Gaza, with more than 70% of buildings destroyed, and now we're, of course, seeing the same script play out in Lebanon. But I came to the conclusion that if you think this is okay and that it's justified, or that it's just, war, man, well, then there's probably nothing I can tell you, no argument that I can make that will make you change your mind. Because I think if you can rationalize and justify death on such an industrial scale, you can probably rationalize almost anything. So if at least 40,000 Palestinians, at least, as I said, many of which children under the age of 1, is something that is an acceptable price to pay in the name of Israel's right to self-defense or any other argument that you can make them up with, then why not 400,000? Why not 4 million dead Palestinians? What's the limit? What could I ever say that could make you change your mind if nothing that's happened over the past year has changed your mind? And I could say a lot of things, of course, maybe anticipating some of the arguments that I imagine the other speakers will make to justify this. I could tell you that this conflict, of course, did not start on October 7th, but is rooted in decades of violence, oppression, discrimination, torture, and killing of Palestinians by the Israeli state. That it is rooted in the Israeli occupation and apartheid regime, as was in fact acknowledged even by many prominent Israeli voices in the aftermath of the October 7th attack. The day after, on October 8th, Haaretz, which is the most prestigious Israeli newspaper, in its main editorial, laid the blame for what happened on October 7th squarely on Netanyahu for, and I quote, embracing a foreign policy that openly ignored the existence and rights of the Palestinians. I could quote you the Israeli historian Omer Bartov, a Holocaust expert, who said, and I quote, the attack by Hamas, horrific and barbarous as it was, must be seen as a response to Israel's policy of occupation and siege, and to Israel's utter refusal over the last couple of decades to find a political solution to the conflict. I could tell you that Israel bolstered Hamas for years, precisely as a way to prevent a political solution. I could tell you about the 40 Palestinian children that were killed last year by Israel before October 7th. I could tell you that what is happening in Gaza is not a war. It's not, in my opinion, it's not even a war on Hamas. It's ethnic cleansing. It's genocide, i.e. the deliberate destruction of a significant portion of the population in Gaza. Remember, according to Lancet, up to 10% of the Gazan population might have already been killed. And again, this isn't my opinion. This is the opinion of the International Court of Justice, but it's also the opinion of several Jewish and Israeli genocide experts, such as the already mentioned Omer Bartov, but also Amos Goldberg, Raz Segal, Barry Trachtenberg, and many others. And I can tell you that Israel's arguments, such as the human shield argument, are absurd and immoral. Even Israel's military and political headquarters are located in heavily populated civilian areas. So by the same logic, Palestinians would be justified in flattening an entire Tel Aviv neighborhood to take out Netanyahu or some other military target. Yet, as far as I know, no one on the Palestinian side has ever made that argument. I can tell you that conflating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism is, in my view, immoral, and is in part what is fueling anti-Semitism worldwide. The truth is that countless Jews around the world oppose the Israeli regime and the genocide in Gaza. They've been at the forefront of the pro-Palestinian demonstrations over the past year, some of which I've already mentioned. I could tell you that Jews are sometimes even the victims of the Zionist weaponization of anti-Semitism. Several German Jews have been arrested for speaking out in favor of Palestine. I could tell you that the first American tenured professor to be fired on grounds of anti-Semitism and pro-Palestinian talk was, you guessed it, Jewish. She's called Maura Finkelstein. I could tell you that I think that the real racism is directed at the Palestinians, whose lives apparently don't matter in the eyes of the West. I can tell you that all the death and destruction is not making Israel any safer, but I would argue is having the opposite effect. It's transforming Israel into a rogue pariah state in the eyes of the overwhelming majority of the world's population. I would say even in the eyes of many young Jews. I could tell you this and a lot more, but would it really make a difference? And I'm closing here. Probably not, and yet I think I will keep saying it because when some years from now, my now 6-year-old daughter will ask me why the West stood by silently and in fact enabled the slaughter of tens of thousands of innocent children just like her, I want to be able to tell her, at least, that I was not silent. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Dominic.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Is your microphone on? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, may I thank you for inviting me tonight for a debate that is crucial for all of us. But I have to start with a confession. I am not pro-Israel. I am against evil. There is no existing conflict right now in the world like the one that started a year ago, where it is as easy to distinguish between good and evil. What happened? Hamas attacked innocent civilians, murdering everyone they could, from babies to Holocaust survivors, from partygoers to others just sleeping in their beds. Women were raped, men were tortured. The attackers were proud of what they were doing. They filmed it and messaged their atrocities proudly back home. After many hours of slaughter, more than 1,200 were killed and 250 were caught as hostages. Hamas just did what Yahya Sinwar promised to do in 2018, and I quote, "We will take down the border and we will tear out their hearts from their bodies." One day later, Hezbollah, in breaking a UN resolution, joined in with rockets raining down on homes of innocent people. Another 11 days later, the Houthis joined the conflict. Hamas itself went on firing rockets, about 10,000 of them, and after days of shock, Israel started fighting back in self-defense. 12 months later, we can see much clearer what it all means, I think. The terror attack of October 7th was, for me, the start of a war. The regime of Iran launched a war against Israel with its proxies in the Gaza Strip, in Lebanon, and in Yemen. And on April 13th of this year, the Mullah regime joined openly the war with an attack of more than 300 missiles and drones. Iran repeated this attack just last week on October the 1st. What we have seen is the foes of Israel started a war. They have no intention of making a difference between combatants and civilians. Their goal is to kill, to rape, to take hostages. The foes of Israel are using their own civilians to protect their war effort. They are using civilian infrastructure like schools and hospitals, even refugee camps. The foes of Israel don't care about their own people, or with Ismail Haniya's own words on October last year, "We need the blood of women, children, and the elderly of Gaza, so it awakens our revolutionary spirit," end quote. Israel's army, on the other hand, does what no army in world history has ever done. It even warns civilians where they will strike. Israel is using weapons to defend its civilians. Iran's proxies are using civilians to protect their weapons. The result of this war against Israel is a terrible amount of civilian losses, but that's caused by the terrible and unlawful strategy of Israel's foes. As Douglas Murray said the other day, there is no law that you can start a war and complain when you lose it. If you really care about the civilians in Gaza, in Lebanon, and in Yemen, then stop blaming Israel and turn on the leadership of these proxies and their chiefs in Iran. Speak out against their bloodthirsty ideology. Stand up against their anti-Semitism and their hate of the West as a whole. What's going on is an existential threat to the only democracy and only multicultural, multi-religious state in the Middle East. But this war is not just about Israel. If you listen carefully to Israel's foes, it is more than that. It is as well a war against the other Arab countries who were slowly normalizing their relations with Israel and highly benefited from it. And it is a war against the West as a whole, a war against the free and open society we cherish. Iran's supreme leader stated on February 24th that the Western civilization is based on misguided values and Iran will fight till the end against it. You have to be careful. When they chant death to America, they mean death to you. So it is good news that leaders of Hamas and Hezbollah have been killed. It is good news that the IAF is attacking places where the estimated 150,000 rockets of Hezbollah are stored. It is good news if Israel tackles the nuclear program of the Iranian regime like it did back in 1981 in Iraq and in 2007 in Syria. A year after the horrible atrocities of October 7th, I see the possibility of peace in the Middle East. I'm optimistic. Not with a ceasefire like 2006 in Lebanon, in 2008, 12, 14, and 21 in Gaza. These ceasefires did not tackle the root of the problem. These ceasefires led to the October 7th massacre. This time, we should let Israel win this war. Overall, we are at the brink of a long war between authoritarian regimes and the free society, and there is one tiny country that is able to stop it. If Israel succeeds, then in this century, maybe never was so much owed by so many to so few. Thank you.
Stefan. Oh. Yep, you've got it.
It's red, yeah?
It's red.
Okay. I was introduced as a film producer. It's only part of my existence. I actually see myself as a humanitarian practitioner more than anything else. But probably my biography was so long that it was hard to choose from. But I wanted to say this because I actually see myself as a free spirit, and I think, and that's what makes me make film, and what makes me think of hopefully making others think about film that I make. Okay, that's a bit of a long-winded introduction. But I see myself as a deconstructor. I was living 9 years in those territories that we're talking about, both in Gaza and the West Bank. And if I can help in this debate to break down certain things that might be not so obvious that come from the pens of writers, then I'd be very happy to contribute as such. And therefore, I want to tell you that I'm not an expert on anti-Semitism. I don't even believe it exists. I think anti-Semitism... yeah. No, it's okay. It's okay. I can stand up for my own thing. Anti-Semitism is not a one thing for all. That's what I mean. You can use it as you wish. You can use any word or any term, concept, but I think it's not a helpful term. Okay, it's badly described and badly interpreted, and I think it's very dangerous to use it. But apart from that, I'm going to tell you a story. I was still very young in my new profession, was an ICRC delegate, and I got a job in working in the West Bank. I was driving through the West Bank after a few months of my new job and doing things such as visiting prisoners and so on and so forth, as you do. And I came upon a roadblock. It was a civilian roadblock. It was a road used by both settlers and Palestinians. But for some reason, some people took the law into their own hands and stopped everybody that was non-Israeli to pass through, including the ICRC, who's been invited by the government of Israel. So I came up this road. We saw from afar that this was a tense place, so I put up the big flag on our Land Cruiser so we would be seen. We would open our windows so that we could hear things. It was a dangerous situation, okay? So we drove all the way up to the checkpoint. We were not allowed to pass. Guns were pointed at us, and a young lady came to the car, and she started speaking in French. She said, vous êtes de Genève? I said, no, our organization is based in Geneva, and that's why it's on our logo. So she said, okay, well, you know, we are here because we are defending our country. And I said, oh, okay, that's whatever it is. I said, I'm here because I tried to get Palestinian children from the other side to either hospitals or schools. Is there any chance that maybe we could pass? I mean, these are civilians and so on and so forth, quoting the Geneva Conventions and what have you. But I said to her, hang on, where are you from? Out of curiosity. And she said, well, I'm from Zurich. All right. I said, so you're actually from the same city as I am? Yes, sir. She was about 3 to maybe 5 years younger than me. And I said to her, so what country are you defending with your gun here? I said, shouldn't that be an army to do this job? Why are you taking it upon yourself? But what to me was the most shocking of all was I went to the Rami Bühl, I don't know, most of you would probably know where that is, and she went to the Freudenberg. So we were literally going to school, 3 kilometers from each other. We had a very similar upbringing, we spoke the same language, you know, we had very similar experiences, albeit maybe different ideas and different ideologies and stuff, but it left something in me. And what it left in me was, how could you get somebody that's so close and yet so far away from you to actually try to find a solution to the problem? The problem was the children going to school or hospitals. At that time, I didn't know the answer. But I can tell you now, we have international law. And all my films and film work are about international law, and I'm here to defend international law, albeit I'm not a lawyer, but I know the law from exercising it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Daniel.
I'm going to stand up if that's okay. And if saying that anti-Semitism exists is dangerous, I'm going to be extremely dangerous. Because I think not only does it exist, you cannot understand what is happening. You cannot understand the motivation of Hamas. You cannot understand what's happened in the West unless you look at anti-Semitism. I disagree strongly with Thomas when he says it's being weaponized. I think the real problem, which we saw from Stefan, is denial of anti-Semitism. So let's just look at Hamas. If I had more time, I'd look at other Islamist groups. But let's just focus on Hamas. Hamas is a very explicitly anti-Semitic organization. Its 1988 charter, or covenant, is available in English, it's available in German. It explicitly talks about slaughtering Jews. It explicitly talks about destroying Israel. Maybe you don't want to call it anti-Semitic. I call it anti-Semitic. That is still their charter, and Hamas leaders say again and again and again that's what they want to do. Because in the view of what the Islamists say, if you bother to look at their doctrine, and it's very sad very few people do look at their doctrine, their view is that the world is controlled by satanic Jewish evil. That's how they understand it. If you read Islamist writers like Sayyid Qutb, who's the most influential, that's what they say, and therefore the Jews have to be destroyed. And that's what is motivating them in Gaza. They're not a Palestinian organization, Hamas. It drives me mad. People say Hamas is a Palestinian organization. It does not define itself as a Palestinian organization. What it defines itself as is the Palestinian arm of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an international Islamist organization. And what its goal is to have an international Islamist order. It's completely hostile to the idea of national self-determination. Not just for Jews, not just for Israelis, it's for Palestinians too. It has no notion of national self-determination for Palestinians. So when I say Hamas is an anti-Palestinian organization, that is not just rhetoric, that is the truth. And even if Israel wasn't there, Gaza would be like, Afghanistan or Iran. No rights for women, no rights for gays, no control over the lives of ordinary people. That is not just my view, that is what Hamas says itself, if you bother to read what it says. Sorry, just want to grab some water. But I think a bigger problem for us here, well, me in Britain, maybe Thomas in Italy, in Switzerland, is the West. Because it seems to me that the 7th of October, exactly a year ago today, was a moral test. You had about 1,200 people slaughtered by Hamas, mostly Jews. There were some Thai workers and other people, not entirely Jews. Some Muslims were slaughtered as well. Maybe that's not anti-Semitism. Maybe you don't want to call it anti-Semitism. But I say that if an organization, an armed organization, says it wants to kill Jews and does kill Jews, I call it anti-Semitic. And far too many people in the West fail to stand up and condemn that. It's completely outrageous. Now, can you criticize Israel? Of course you can criticize Israel. I would make many criticisms of Israel. It's far from a perfect place. But if you look at what the anti-Israel movement is saying now, it's not just you can criticize Israel. They are saying Israel is the epitome of evil in the world. More than any country in the world. You have all sorts of problems in the world. You've had 500,000 people slaughtered recently in the Syrian civil war, a similar number in the Yemen civil war, wars in Sudan, lots of terrible things happening in the world. But Israel, just Israel, in the view of the anti-Israel movement, or not everyone to be fair, but most people now, is that Israel is the symbol of evil. The Jewish state is the symbol of evil in the world. You may not call that anti-Semitism. I do call it anti-Semitism. And I would just like to end with a question. I'm not sure what the answer will be, both from Thomas and Stefan, just to make clear, is their view, and I don't know the answer, like I say, I'm not prejudging the answer, and whatever their answer is, we can debate it, but I would like them to make clear whether they think Israel should be destroyed or not. Because that is what the anti-Israel movement is saying. Until a year ago, they were talking about the occupation most of the time, meaning the occupation of the West Bank, meaning they generally favoured a two-state solution. Now they're talking about from the river to the sea, Palestine Arabia, other synonyms for it, but basically saying Israel should be destroyed. So if we're going to have a serious debate, I think Stefan and Thomas should put their cards on the table. I know they have criticisms, that's fair enough, they can criticise it. But do they think Israel has a right to exist at all? If we're going to have a serious debate, we need to discuss that as well.
Thank you to all four of you. I appreciate this is an emotional topic, particularly on today as an anniversary. I have to say that in the UK it'd be very unlikely we could even have this discussion, that we could have four people with such different views speaking on the same panel. So I congratulate you for that. Before I come out to the audience, I wondered if you on this side wanted to speak to some of the points on this side, and then I will ask the same of yourselves. If you don't want to, that's fine, we can go straight to the audience.
Look, Daniel, I mean, the idea that Hamas committed, the attack, or that was motivated first and foremost by anti-Semitism. That these people were just got up one day and happened to do what they did because they hate Jews. So you're completely taking that out of the context of the occupation, the Gaza siege, the brutalization that these people have been suffering for decades. You're just saying it's all about anti-Semitism. So if they were living in Switzerland rather than in Gaza or elsewhere in Palestine, they would be just as anti-Semitic as they are. That's clearly preposterous. That's clearly preposterous. This is clearly the hate, even the hatred and the anti-Semitism on Hamas's part, which is real, is clearly born out of the brutal reality of the occupation. The idea Palestinians historically have not, curried favor for Islamic extremism. I'm sure you know that. In fact, the Palestinian resistance for a long time has been a secular, left, socialist resistance. That resistance has failed to bring freedom and self-determination to the Palestinians, which is why now they're turning to another option, an option that I like much less than as a leftist, than the previous secular leftist resistance. But all these dynamics are clearly born out of the never-ending reality of the occupation, including the anti-Semitism of Hamas. That said, we should also mention that Hamas has also revised its charter. Many of its leaders have accepted the legitimacy of the existence of the State of Israel and have said that they were in favor of a two-state solution. There have been several openings from Hamas which have been completely ignored by Israel. In fact, as I said in my talk, Israel bolstered Hamas precisely because it did not want to reach a political solution to the conflict. And Netanyahu last year boasted about all the efforts he did to sabotage any possibility of a diplomatic, peaceful solution to the conflict. So it's pretty clear that the Israeli leadership for a very long time has not even considered a political diplomatic solution to the conflict, and Hamas is born out of that brutal reality. Very briefly, if we want to talk about anti-Semitism, many of Israeli leaders have made exactly the same statements about Palestinians, saying they want to exterminate them, saying they have to be destroyed, saying they are all the enemy, speaking of collective punishment. So to the extent that Palestinians are also Semitic, I would argue that Israel's leaders are just as anti-Semitic as Hamas. And of course, on the question of Israel, there might be some people that want to see Israel destroyed. Most people, and you know that, want to see the occupation end and want to see an end to the apartheid regime and want to see freedom and self-determination for the Palestinians. And you know that, and saying otherwise is just dishonest.
Thank you. Dominic, Daniel, do you want to come back or would you like me to go out to the audience?
No, I definitely want to come back. Most of what Thomas said is simply untrue. He says it's preposterous to say that Islamists as a whole are anti-Semitic. Just to be clear, I'm not talking about Muslims. I'm talking about Islamism as a political movement. Islamism as a political movement started in 1928 in Egypt, not in Palestine, started 20 years before the State of Israel was founded, and has always had anti-Semitism at its core. So if you come across Islamists in London, as I have done, or I'm sure in Zurich, and in the Middle East, not just Palestinians. Palestinians are a very small minority of Islamists. They are completely anti-Semitic. It's completely core to their doctrine. You have, even Islamist-influenced politicians like, Malaysia, making anti-Semitic statements. It's core to Islamist doctrine. It's not a reaction to the occupation, so-called occupation, because it's a global phenomenon among Islamists. So Thomas can say it's preposterous, but it's actually true. It is true that a few Israeli politicians have made abominable statements. It's an outlier, though. It is not... I didn't interrupt you. Let me say what I'm saying. And I completely condemn those kind of statements. But it is not a central doctrine of Zionism to say that the Palestinians should be destroyed. If anything, the major fault of Zionism historically, and I would criticize them for this, is they just didn't take the Palestinians into account. They just thought, okay, we're going to go there, and maybe there's indigenous people living there, but we're really not going to think about them. That was a major problem with mainstream Zionism. It's just absolutely untrue to say that the mainstream Zionist doctrine is symmetrical to what Islamists say. And just finally, sorry, my mouth is getting very dry with the emotion. It is absolutely true, and I ask you to judge for yourself. You don't need to trust Thomas or me. Look nowadays at what anti-Israel movements are saying, and clearly there are differences between individuals. I'm not saying everyone is identical. But it's very, very common for them now, this is a change over the past year, for them to say Israel is the evil country in the world, Israel has to be destroyed. They're talking much less about the occupation than they used to be. And that's the reality now. I noticed that Stefan and Thomas also haven't answered my question about where they stand on Israel's existence. I would like them to answer that question because I don't think we can have a sensible debate without that question being answered.
Thank you. Stefan, did you want to add some more? Yeah.
Well, I answer you that question, I think. It has nothing to do with Israel. I think what we're talking about is anti-Zionism. Because all my friends that are Israeli Jews all over the world, I have no problem. They have no problem with being anti-Zionist, but they can't be annihilating themselves. So I think the reason why I said anti-Semitism is not a helpful term is because what these people mean is anti-Zionism and not anti-Israelism.
But do you think Israel should exist? That's the question.
Yes, of course, why not?
Okay, that was the question, okay.
No, it's a wonderful country.
Oh, okay.
But it has some evil people living in it, if you wish, okay.
Thank you. Dominic, out of fairness, would you like to add?
Just one sentence on the context question. For me, it's really incredible. For me, there's no context imaginable that could rectify those horrors a year ago. It's just not imaginable. And if you speak about who is morally equal than the other, just ask yourself, how many Palestinians are living in Israel? And how many Jews are living in Gaza or in the West Bank or in Syria or in Egypt or in Iraq or in Iran? So the racism is deeply rooted, maybe in those countries, maybe in those cultures, maybe in the religion. But in Israel, there are, of course, some idiots, like everywhere. But in Israel, living as an Arab Palestinian, that's the freest way to live as an Arab in the whole world, maybe, well, or in the Middle East at least.
Thank you, Dominic. Okay, thank you very much. I will come out to the audience now. You can, as I said earlier, ask a question of anybody on this panel. You can make a point. And what I will do is I'll take 2 or 3 questions at once. If you can let me know you want to speak with a raise of the hand, and then I will come back to the panel. Gentleman here was first.
Good evening. This is a question for Daniel Ben-Ami and potentially Dominic as well. It'll take me 3 or 4 minutes to get through my questions, but please bear with me, they're important questions. Firstly, I'd like to say that my background is neither Jewish nor Islamic, although I do look like a lot of people call me an Egyptian. Nor do I subscribe to any particular paradigms posited by any institutionalized religion, including the religion of both my parents, which is Hinduism. So from a religious standpoint, I'm as neutral an observer to the events taking place in the Middle East as you will find. And I just want to make that clear. Nevertheless, I do research a lot when it comes to world events, so that I can place myself in an educated position from which to formulate as much as possible my own objective opinions on events. And saying this, I read your article on anti-Semitism, Ben, and I have a couple of questions I would like to ask. In your article, you say that they, the Islamists, fundamentally believe they are locked in a struggle against the cosmic, satanic evil of the Jews. I would like to ask that before 1948, when more than 15,000 peaceful Palestinians were killed and 531 towns and villages destroyed during the Al-Nakba, the catastrophe, by the incoming Zionist settlers, backed by the British government, which party exactly was engaging in cosmic satanic evil at that point? Did any Palestinians come to seek out Jews all over Europe to kill them and destroy their homes? No, they didn't. It was the Zionists who came to invade the land of the people who had a civilized society, boasting trade routes around the world, top universities, a deep and civilized culture, and all the facilities of a civilized society. And you can look this up. The Zionists came in and destroyed all that they saw and all that had been built over hundreds of years by the people living in Palestine, claiming that it was a completely unoccupied land. So isn't it a contradiction to claim that the Palestinians view the Jews as satanically evil, when in fact the actions of the Zionists, and not the Jews, it's important to know this, the Zionists, clearly demonstrate that they, the Zionists, are satanically evil themselves, if indeed there is such a thing as Satan in the first place. Second question, this brings me on to my second question, which is, I have seen time and time again how Zionists adapt Judaism when it suits them and use the slur of anti-Semitism when it suits them. I am not denying for a moment that true anti-Semitism does not exist. Of course it does. But I put it to you that the pseudo-anti-Semitism adopted by Zionists serves the purpose of propaganda in favor of the Zionist agenda rather than meeting any true objective of addressing the hatred of the Jewish people. Why do I say this? Because you cannot deny that there is a huge rift within Israel itself and all over the world between Orthodox Jews and Zionists. Many Orthodox Jews do not follow the Zionist ideal, and in fact say that the Zionist ethics, principles and values are diametrically and fundamentally opposed to the words of the Torah, the Hebrew Bible. Not only this, many Zionists are not practicing Jews, and you can also look this up, and yet it is these same people who cry wolf and speak of anti-Semitism, therefore adapting Judaism in its entirety when they need to rouse up the emotions of the unknowing public. But the world is watching, and the world is not stupid. So the question is, how long will the Zionists continue to try and pull the wool over our eyes before realizing that we don't buy into the Zionist pseudo-anti-Semitic myth?
Okay.
Can we just clear up what Zionism means?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Do you want to explain what you mean by Zionism? People have different views on what it means.
I can only explain what my understanding of Zionism is the idea behind having a state for the Jews, which my understanding would be Israel, and the fact that it's basically my understanding is that it's not pure Judaism. It's not Orthodox Judaism. That's my understanding of Zionism.
Fine. Okay, thank you. I'm going to actually pass the microphone to this lady who was next. Yep. Thank you. Yep.
I find this very interesting because we hear the term Zionism so often and it has a very different meaning everywhere we go, but it's a very strong word, so people love to use it. But I would like to, it's actually more something, I'm interested to hear what you have to say. My name is Joël Bail. I used to live in Israel for almost 9 years. I worked there as a journalist for Swiss media, also for German media, but mainly for Switzerland. So, saying about myself that I know this place quite well. What I see very often outside of Israel, especially when it comes to the pro-Palestinian movement, is that people, such yourself, have very, very low expectations when it comes to the Palestinians. When you're saying that, of course, something like Hamas needs to come out of this, when we look at what they go through, then I need to say...
I said it's a natural consequence.
So if we take
of preventing other avenues.
Which I'm happy to take over, we could also say this about the Jewish people, looking at the Jewish people, how much they went through everywhere in the world, not only in one country, like literally the whole world. How would you expect something else to come out of this? So there is a very big difference on how we really look at this matter. When you really love someone, you have high expectations. You want your child to be good in life. You want your child to reach for the stars, to do something, to build something up. But to constantly look at the people you say you love and put a victim narrative constantly on them, this is what will make them never ever bloom. And this is, in my opinion, probably the most unfair thing that happens to the Palestinian people, that no one ever expects anything from them. And I find this wrong.
Thank you. I think there was somebody at the back there, and then this gentleman here. Yeah, go to this gentleman here, yeah. Keep indicating if you want to speak, yeah? Thank you.
So I want to first clarify, I'm a middle ground person. I'm neither pro-Palestinian nor Israeli. I consider myself a humanitarian, and I have studied wars on terrorism and the outcomes that happen. And I personally feel that this is just another war on terrorism that increases terrorism. Because a lot of these groups like Hamas and all that, they work on a self-system basis. They give only a certain amount of information to their people, and then when their people are caught, it takes decades and decades to eradicate them, like similar groups like the Taliban and so on and so forth. And I see that history is just repeating itself. Like the US had the war on terrorism, Israel is now committing a war on terrorism as well in the name of national defense, which it does have a right to as well. But what I'm seeing is that the numbers outweigh the means that they're going through. Now they're simply going after people in other countries and violating several charters of international law that say you cannot just bomb another country because you think that, oh, here we have this intelligence and it's not been verified that, yeah, a lot of times intelligence is not very sound. It works on information from local people who might not know the most up-to-date things about where these groups hide themselves, and they move from place to place when they're exposed.
Thank you. Can you pass the microphone to this gentleman here? I'll take one more and then we'll come back to the panel for some responses. Thank you.
Wouldn't libertarianism and its fervent opposition to collectivism be the solution to weed out all the bad weeds in both sides of the equation?
Did you catch that? Could you say that one more time, please?
Wouldn't libertarianism and its defense of as a counter balance to collectivism?
The collectivism on both sides, yeah. Okay, great question. I'm going to come back to the panel. We'll go in the order we spoke in. Thomas first.
First of all, the Palestinians are the victims, because when you have a nuclear-armed state with an incredibly powerful army, backed by the most powerful country in the world, along with every other country in the West, that provides it with unlimited money and weapons, which is essentially which has been imprisoning millions of Palestinians for years, which has been subjecting them to a de facto military dictatorship, because the Palestinians in the occupied territories have no rights whatsoever. The truth is that Israel already controls all the land of historical Palestine. The Palestinians don't control the West Bank, and they don't even truly control Gaza, whose sea, land, and air are totally controlled by Israel. So when you have this nuclear-armed superpower, which is oppressing a people that doesn't have an army, that has no means of militarily resisting that state, then they are the victims. So there should be no doubt about the fact of who the victim is here. The victims are the Palestinians who have been subjected to 76 years of occupation. And I'm amazed that anyone would think otherwise, that the Palestinians could be the culprits here. No. That the people who have been imprisoned, that have been subjected to military rule by Israel for decades, could be the culprits. That's what you're implying, which I find is astonishing. But I know that the idea is very widespread in Israel and beyond. So, nothing surprises me. Nothing surprises me anymore these days. On the question of, that we somehow don't, that we don't hold up the Palestinians to sufficiently high standards. What do you think the Palestinians should have done to obtain, freedom and self-determination? It seems to me they tried every possible avenue in the book. They tried the political diplomatic avenue with the Oslo Accords. What happened right after the signing of the Oslo Accords? Life in the occupied territories got worse for the Palestinians. That's ultimately why the deal unraveled, because Arafat could not justify that deal in the eyes of the Palestinians. After signing the Oslo Accords, Israel started setting up the checkpoints in the West Bank, making life much more of a hell for Palestinians. Life in Gaza got much harder after the signing of the Oslo Accords. So they tried that avenue. They tried the political diplomatic avenue. Clearly, Israel had no intention of truly giving the Palestinians a state. And even Israeli leaders have subsequently admitted that Oslo wasn't a true peace proposal. They tried for several years a non-religious, secular, armed resistance. I'm sure you find that horrific, but we know that historically every military occupation produces military resistance, armed resistance. I know, terrible, isn't it? But that's what history teaches us. But they went for a secular, non-religious, non-Islamist resistance for a very, very long time. So they tried that avenue. That didn't work either. I'm concluding. They tried non-violent resistance. You might remember something called the Great March of Return in 2018, when Palestinians in Gaza peacefully marched up to the wall, only to be shot at by Israeli snipers, which killed more than 100 Palestinians. Non-violent protest.
Let me let other people come in.
Support with the BDS movement. What's more non-violent than that? That's been declared de facto illegal in most Western states. So I would like you to tell me what you think the Palestinians should do.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Thomas. We may well ask you what you think in a moment. Dominic.
It's interesting. This non-violent resistance in 2018 was raising a swastika at the border of Israel. So yeah, it is true, and they were armed as well. And the Hamas leaders were saying this march is going through streets of blood to Jerusalem. So for me, I don't know whether this is non-violent resistance. The Palestinians rejected the two-state solution 5 times, starting in 1937 with the Peel Commission. You know all these facts. I just want to recall them. And then for the honourable man over there, look, this libel of colonization is just the actual libel of Jews. For centuries, these libels have been on religion, and I think when religion disappears, then some new libels are coming up, and it's absolutely, it's really I would even say horrific. And Islamists were the first colonizers of the world, even before the term colonization was invented. They were the true colonizers of everything, and in their religion, there is the need to colonize the world. And if you listen carefully what they are saying in Arab TV stations, there is a wonderful institute, the Middle East Media Research Institute, that is translating Arab TV stations into English. Just listen to them and believe them, and then you will know that this is one of the baddest libels of these times, I would assume.
Thanks. Stefan? Pick any question that you want to address.
Well, I just wanted to go back to my story of the young lady that took up arms coming from some country that had really very little to do at the time with the West Bank, and gets away with all of this. Israel has an army. If it's an occupation proper, it's an army that controls, but it doesn't put in civilians at will and gives them the right to do whatever they want. I think that stuff is underreported, way underreported. I hear it because I know where to get the information from, but it's happening every day. And there's so many people, unless what Dominic said, I think there's 600 and something thousand Israelis living in the West Bank by now. So it's not that they're not in the West Bank, okay? But other than that, sorry, I will.
Okay, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's telling is that the things that missed out, the kind of gross one-sidedness of this side of the debate is just staggering. I mean, just to give some definitions to start with, because it might help the discussion. I would argue, and when I write, I talk about the anti-Israel movement, not the pro-Palestinian movement. And that's not just some kind of rhetorical trick. Because I think when you look at what they're saying, the vast majority of it is Israel is the most evil country in the world. Just to remind you, it's not criticism of Israel. It's saying Israel is more evil than all the other countries in the world put together. In fact, if you look at the UN General Assembly resolutions last year, twice as many criticisms of Israel than all the other 190 countries in the world put together. So they're not pro-Palestinian. They support the Islamist movement, which is anti-national self-determination. They're anti-Israel. What Zionism means is, and it's not a religious movement, it started off as pretty much a secular movement, although it has kind of religious spin-offs from it. It's a belief in a Jewish state. And very quickly, although they talked about other possible areas, very quickly they came to the view that Israel, what we now call Israel, should be the site for the Jewish state. Now, sorry, I don't know your name, the bald guy, if I'm allowed to say that in the middle. I'm not trying to be rude, just to be descriptive. But what you missed out of your account is absolutely, unbelievable. Because what did you have in the run-up to the creation of the State of Israel? You had the Holocaust, when you had 6 million Jews slaughtered, not by the Palestinians, I'm not blaming the Palestinians, but that happened, or maybe you don't count it as anti-Semitism, I would count that as anti-Semitism. Then you also had 750,000 or so Jews kicked out of Arab lands shortly after Israel was founded. So they went to Israel. Very few of them had a political belief in Zionism. They went to Israel because they had nowhere else to go. There's a Hebrew song about it, Ein li eretz acheret, I have no other country. They had nowhere else to go. That's where they ended up. And they got into a terrible conflict with the Palestinians. And it's a huge, huge tragedy. And yes, there were some bad things done by the Israeli forces in 1948, but also you had 5 Arab countries invading Israel the moment it was founded. And that just gets missed out of the discussion because we have such a one-sided discussion. And just finally, let me finish. We've got a lot of talk about the Palestinians, and it's fine to talk about the Palestinians. What people seem to have forgotten, again, another thing missed out, all these incredible things that Thomas and Stefan are missing out in their kind of completely one-sided narratives. Over the past year, Israel has not just been fighting Hamas, Israel has been engaged in what is called a seven-front war. So from October, Israel was attacked by the Houthis in Yemen. From October, Israel was attacked by Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's been attacked by Iranian Shiite militias from Syria and Iraq, and now directly it's been attacked by the Islamic Republic of Iran. So of course it's important to look at the conflict involving Israel and Hamas in Gaza, where the Palestinians are the victims of, I would say, the victims of Hamas, not the victims of Israel. If you look at what's happened, we can talk more about that. But in any event, it's a seven-front war. It is not just Israel against the people of Gaza, although I think that's misleading. It's Israel being attacked by the Islamist movement worldwide, including being militarily attacked on 7 fronts in the Middle East.
Thank you. I'm going to come to people who haven't spoken yet, but by all means come back in a moment. And also we have got some questions about the war on terror and the West's response, and some about collectivism and individualism. Let me go to some other people, and I will come back to you once we've got time. Go to the gentleman right at the back there, please. Yeah.
I was just wondering, as an ignorant outsider, just what should Palestinians have done. I travel a lot to the Middle East and Dubai, and when I compare Dubai to Gaza, Gaza seems a lot better located than Dubai. So why haven't they built
Seems a lot what?
Sorry?
Better located.
Better located, yeah. I mean, Dubai is basically an open desert, it's a hopeless place. But so why didn't they build a sort of Dubai in Gaza? After all the billions of dollars in aid, why didn't they build something out of that?
Okay, thank you.
I don't mean to provoke it.
Yeah, okay. somebody, yeah, this lady here.
So I was listening, and it's a battle of ideas, of course, but I heard a focus on the result of what's happening, the number of people that died as a result of this conflict. On that side, on my right, and on my left, I've heard the number of missiles or RPGs that fell. So I would like to see maybe a focus on how many people died as a result of Hamas, Hezbollah attacks.
Thank you. That's an interesting point about the number of people who've been killed, but also, is there something about the way in which the war has been conducted on both sides, perhaps? Okay, this gentleman here in the green, and then, yeah, at the back, yeah.
So I'd like to identify myself clearly. I'm an associate of Stefan, so you know where I'm coming from. I'd like to make a few comments about what's been said. First of all, the question that you asked was, does Israel have the right to exist? Well, I think if I give an emotional answer, yes, clearly, I'm Australian. My ancestors moved into an area which was inhabited by people who'd been there for 60,000 years and essentially pushed them aside, using, in some cases, ethnic cleaning. So does Australia today have the right to exist? I have to say yes, because I'm an Australian. And I think even if we think that what happened last century in Australia is not just, we can't turn history back. And I think in the case of Israel, it's the same. Israel exists, we can't turn back whatever we think of what happened. So Israel clearly has the right to exist. I'd like to make another comment on something you said as a former UN official. That it's true there are an enormous number of resolutions in the UN on Israel compared with any other big problem in the world that's much higher. The reason is, it's just one reason. The UN has a special legal responsibility for Israel-Palestine. Israel was created after a UN resolution, and the UN has a legal responsibility to resolve that issue, and it has not been resolved. And so it's normal that the UN focuses very much on where it has a legal responsibility. So I don't think that's a valid argument for anti-Semitism. I'd like to make one general comment, which is we're talking a lot about anti-Semitism, and I think anti-Semitism exists. Sorry, Stefan, I disagree. I think it's a big problem, and I think we should be focusing on that. But I mean, anti-Semitism is at most just one aspect of the problem in Gaza and Palestine at the moment. And I think our discussion, our focus on anti-Semitism is crowding out a lot of the other things which should be talked about. And I'd like to end by two questions. One to you, Dominique. You said we should let Israel win the war. So I'd like to understand what you think, how you think the war can be won. What is the end result of Israel ending the war? And my other question is to the other side, and something which has disturbed me since October the 7th, and is I think many of the things that Israel has done is difficult to justify, but what should Israel have done to respond to the Hamas attack?
Okay, thank you for that question. Let's take the microphone to the back there. Of course, it was the title of our discussion tonight about anti-Semitism as well. I think we were looking to discuss the conflict in the Middle East and also the West's response, but we allow the conversation to go where it wants to go. Yes, sir.
First of all, I want to say I'm not taking any sides in this conflict. I can see both sides, the arguments on both sides. I can see why Israel wants and needs to defend themselves. I can also see why Palestinians want and needs to defend themselves. So my question to all panelists is, can you see also why the other side wants to defend themselves? And do you think they have both a right to defend themselves?
Thank you. Okay, let's come back to the panel then, unless, did you want to come back on that question before, sir?
You okay, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I've forgotten because my train of thought.
Okay, fine. Let's come back to the panel and we'll come back out.
I'll just say one thing, is that, you know, if you, I mean, why is there an issue if you talk about does Israel have a right to exist, then why can it not exist as a one-state solution, same as the UK with a multicultural society? Why do you have to have, well, no.
20% of the Israelis are Arabs from Palestine.
Fine, but in Gaza, it's very clear that you have cameras, surveillance, you have this phrase, mow the lawn, okay, that Benjamin Netanyahu has quoted many times, and then every couple of years you go and clean up. How is that a multicultural, fair society?
Okay, I'll come back to
And
the
then
panel.
you have a separate problem in the West Bank as well.
I think it's also worth clarifying Israel itself is multi-ethnic in the sense that Jews aren't all white, as common myth might have us believe.
But you have this prison camp on the side, yeah?
But
that's okay.
No, I'm not saying it's okay. What I'm saying is you sounded like you didn't think it was a multi-ethnic state. Anyway, let me come back to the panellists. Thomas, I'm going to come to you first.
So is it fair to always, I mean, I'm not trying to have a go at Thomas at all, but sometimes you should do it in the other way round. Isn't that fair? No. I'm just trying to be fair. Well, whatever.
Daniel, the microphone is yours.
And then he can flag me off, which is fair. That's what the debate's about, so that's fair enough. I'm just trying to be fair. So, I mean, just to remind, in relation to the question of the guy at the back, I mean, my conception, remember, is that there are three sides to the conflict, not two sides. That there's the Israelis, there's the Islamists, and the Palestinians are certainly suffering, but they're stuck in the middle. So I know my view isn't a minority view, but that's how I see it. And just to give one example of a calculation I did, which I think has a real bearing on this, I looked at the tunnel network in Gaza compared to the London Underground, believe it or not. And the figures here are in miles, but it doesn't matter because the relative figures are what's important. So in Gaza, you have a population of roughly 2 million people, which is roughly a quarter of London's population. The London Underground, you have 250 miles on the Underground, but about 125 miles is actually underground, the rest is overground. In Gaza, with a quarter of London's population, you have 300 miles of tunnelling. Absolutely incredible. So what has really happened over the past 17, 18 years, well, until 7th of October last year when Hamas controlled it, is basically Hamas had, rather than build Gaza up to be like Dubai or something else, to use the resources to benefit the Palestinian population, what it did was basically create a battlefield where literally, so human shields are not a myth. Gaza is created as a deliberate battlefield with literally Hamas fighters underneath in this huge network of tunnels and the Palestinians as a human shield on top. So Hamas attacked Israel. They knew Israel would counterattack, but from the point of view of Hamas, they were protected by Palestinian civilians above, which they don't care about, because they don't care about self-determination or rights. They care about creating an international Islamist order. And then what they've been saying again and again and again over the past year, it's not just the 1988 Charter, is we will do October the 7th again and again and again. And they said it today. Today it was in the news that they were celebrating the 7th of October. Today, from Gaza, they were still rocketing Israel. So basically what's happened is that Hamas has created this battlefield. Israel has come in. Israel's got is trying to defend itself and its citizens, but has got an immensely difficult job because Hamas has created this massive human shield with Palestinian civilians on top. That's the reality. So it's not a battle between Israel and the Palestinians. It's a battle between Israel and the Islamists, and the poor, poor Palestinians, who I really feel for, are stuck in the middle, or stuck above, to be more accurate.
Yeah, Stefan.
It's getting a bit fuzzy, so I can't remember everything that was said. But the gentleman with the Dubai idea, now I lived in that country, okay? You know, Dubai has open ports and airports. I think that's an answer in itself. That's it, okay? If you can't get anything into Dubai, you will not build Dubai. The same for Gaza. That answers why there are tunnels. The tunnels started because nothing could come into this country. Israel blocked most goods, except for the ones that they were selling to the Palestinians, including their money flows. And so they started building under a wall that Israel built on the border with Egypt. So they made these massive tunnels. That was the start of it. And the rest is, I'm not going to go into warfare and so on and so forth. But I want to tell you that I was actually the head of the barrier monitoring unit in the West Bank. I was the person that had to find out, in terms of research and monitoring, what the impacts were on a 700-kilometer long wall, 700 kilometers, the longest wall except for some Asian countries, okay, obviously, but they're bigger, encircling illegal settlements. So I'm not sure whether that throws in any good ideas to the debate, but it certainly answers that there is a lot of construction going on both sides, okay?
Dominic?
Just one sentence on the Dubai question. It is obviously clear that more goods came into Gaza through Israel than through Egypt. So the watchdog was Egypt over there. Then the question about how many of the lady over there, how many people died. Look, as I said, every death civilian is horrific. But it is a war, and the strategy of Hamas, as Daniel said, is to shield their weapons, their commando structures with civilians. And you know, maybe you heard about this civil war in Syria, where in the last 10 years there were 6 times more people, more Palestinians killed by Bashar al-Assad than in 75 years were dead in the Israeli-Arab conflict. So if you ever said something about Syria, then maybe you are allowed to speak up on this conflict over there. Then to the question of Ian, what is winning the war? How? Look, as a historian, I must say, wars are won by victory, and by victory only, not by a bad ceasefire that will make it possible for Hamas to remilitarize, build new tunnels, and prepare for the next October the 7th, as they say. So we need a victory over there, and then it will be very difficult, but you need kind of a de-Islamization of this society. You need other school books, for example. It is one of the biggest and horrific scandals, the school books of UNRWA that are used over there, and the Swiss diplomat, Mr. Krenbühl, that was going to Ramallah, and he said, no, we won't change anything about this because it is the policy of UNRWA since the 50s. We, Swiss, British and American taxpayers, are paying school books that are promoting racism, fascism, anti-Semitism and terrorism. I'm really ashamed about that, and I'm fighting every day in Bern at the Parliament that we stop funding this.
Thomas.
Yeah, I just want to return briefly on the question of kind of the status of Israel. Israel is not a democracy. A democracy, in its most basic understanding of the term, means equal rights for everyone that live within that territory. So how can you be a democracy while you're oppressing millions of people who have no rights whatsoever, who live under your military rule and your military dictatorship, because that's what happens in the occupied territories? It's not a laughing matter. You should try visiting the West Bank and maybe Gaza one day. Okay. So you've seen the reality of the military. You've seen the reality of the military rule and the military oppression. So a country that rules brutally over millions of people who have no right cannot be considered a democracy in my book. And even within Israel per se, how can you be a democracy in terms of everyone having equal rights regardless of sex, gender, ethnicity, religion, when clearly the country defines itself as the country of the Jewish people? It's a country that's committed to obviously a demographic majority of Jewish people, and is committed to a law was even passed in 2018, the nation-state law, which essentially institutionalizes discrimination against the non-Jewish citizens within Israel. So Israel, even putting aside the occupied territories, Israel doesn't live up to kind of the basic tenets of what it means to be a democracy. I mean, this is uncontroversial. I mean, it's the state of the Jewish people. So, I mean, I'm not saying, when I say that, Israel is a kind of nationalist or ethno-supremacist state, I mean, this shouldn't be controversial. I mean, it should be, it's in Israel's definition of what it is. I mean, this is simply, stating a fact. And on the question of Zionism, I mean, Zionism was more than the idea that the Jews should get a state in Palestine. It was and has always really been, regardless of, the political coloring of Zionism, whether it was left-wing Zionism or right-wing Zionism. I mean, the fundamental thrust, at least the majoritarian trends within Zionism have always been about establishing full Israeli sovereignty over all the land of historical Palestine. And that is why you've had, the left-wing labor movement that was conducting the ethnic cleansing, in the 1940s, and now you've got Netanyahu. But fundamentally, I mean, the fundamental thrust of Zionism is this: it's about establishing full Jewish Israeli sovereignty over the historical land of Palestine, and this is effectively what they've achieved. It's what they have. The problem is that they've got, these millions of Palestinians, which they weren't able to get rid of in 48, and which they, and they couldn't repeat that in 67 for a number of reasons, and so they were stuck with millions of Palestinians that they just decided to put under military rule for decades. And now they see, after October 7, finally an opportunity to do away with the Palestinian problem once and for all, and the Israeli leadership has said it very, very openly, beginning with Netanyahu. And unfortunately, so Zionism has mutated into an openly genocidal ideology, and I find that same thrust in the other side of the panel. I mean, it's as if the Palestinians don't exist. I mean, they're just a problem to be done away with. They're just a problem to be done away with. So 40,000 Palestinians dead is not a problem. If there were 400,000, it probably wouldn't be a problem. If there were 4 million, it still wouldn't be a problem for you. And that's why I'm not very optimistic about these debates, because once you've reached that point where you're ready to accept anything, any amount of dead on the other side, for what you believe is right, then I think we've gone beyond what we can achieve, with rational debate.
No one said that. No one said that.
Do you want to come back on that?
Just, I have a question for the other side. Which part of Palestine is occupied?
Well, you're the law expert, so maybe you answer that.
That's very simple, actually. Gaza and the West Bank.
Pardon?
Gaza and the West Bank.
Okay.
Gaza has not been decolonized by the refraction of 2005. The whatever 4 to 6, I can't remember how many of these little kibbutzes. As long as a country is actually controlled, even from outside, it's part of a it's part of an occupation. The best reference to this is the ICJ conclusion of a court case just a few months ago, and the General Assembly adopting it on the 17th of July. That's a very clear assessment of the situation. Okay.
Yeah, I'll let this side come back because you have. Yeah. Okay, Daniel. briefly though, because I want one more round of questions.
Complete travesty. Thomas accusing myself and Dominic of saying things we've never said. Complete outrageous in a debate. To say that we've said it's okay that 40,000 or 400,000 Palestinians are killed, I think it's absolutely terrible. I really feel for them. I support the Palestinian right to self-determination. I think they've suffered terribly in Gaza. I think the Lebanese people are suffering terribly now. The difference is, I blame the Islamist movement and I blame Hamas. That's the debate. Who do we blame for this terrible situation? It's an absolute tragedy what's happened to the Palestinians. So to be clear, that is what my position is. I think it's yours as well, Dominic, to be fair.
Okay, look, I'm going to come back. Oh, goodness, okay, all of a sudden. I'm going to try and get everybody in. Put your hands up if you want to speak. Okay, this gentleman in the orange jumper, please, who hasn't spoken yet.
Thank you.
Try and keep the comments brief if you can.
So, Thomas had good news and bad news. The good news is that it is possible to change one's opinion in this question. The bad news is I've probably gone in the direction you wouldn't prefer. I grew up in a country where I never heard a positive word about Israel, ever. And only positive things about the victimhood of the Palestinians. And that was in Sweden. Mm-hmm. And some of the reading I've done, in the last years, and especially in the last year, when I was shocked by what happened on October the 8th, when everyone was cheering and celebrating, was that the population of Gaza is growing. Egypt allowed the building of this wall. There were 400 Swedish citizens living in Gaza at that time. And I don't understand why, if it's a concentration camp, and if it's been a concentration camp, what did you call it? For so long. I think you said anti-cleansing and something else. Maybe not concentration, sorry. We seem to handle this kind of situation when someone is losing a war and they're under attack in very different ways in other conflicts. But here the population is growing, not even the Swedish citizens are leaving.
Thank you. Okay, just try and fit. You haven't spoken yet. Yeah, at the front, please. Andrea, what happens if we overrun? Okay.
Just a quick question. You said Israel has the right to exist. Do you think that Palestine has the right to exist as a country?
Great. Okay. Can we pass it over to Sam, the only person whose name I know?
Let's just take it into a different context, right? Let's just say Hamas had a HR department and it was a proper military. And you call up Hamas HR, human resources, and you say, hey, how many staff do you have? How many soldiers do you have? You say, oh, I've got 22,658. And how do they dress? Oh, they dress in this uniform. They've got a red lapel and green beret or whatever, right? So okay, we'll go in and we want to get rid of Hamas. We'll go in and destroy those guys. No problem, right? And then we've got rid of Hamas, and then everyone can be happy. But fundamentally, we all know that Hamas is not an organization in that respect. It is more of a freedom movement, just like the anti-apartheid movement, just like the civil rights movement in the US. I get it that they are terrorists, that they are dangerous, and they have done terrible, terrible things on October the 7th and before. However, if you were to get rid of Hamas, would you get rid of the ideology behind Hamas? You can call it Hamas, you can call it whatever you like. But what I'm trying to pose to you, the question I'm trying to pose to you is that it's not Hamas that is the problem, it is the oppression that is the problem. And it is that which is the opposition to that oppression that is actually the ideology behind that is the problem for Israel. And how do you get rid of that? How do you get rid of that? Okay. You can't just say 22,000 people, Hamas soldiers will kill, and now we've got rid of an ideology, a whole ideology. It's a worldwide ideology.
Okay. Let's get 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's it. Yeah.
I just very strongly want to say, if I hear that Israel is not a democracy, this is clearly not true. Israel is a democracy. Israel is a democracy with a lot of in-house made problems, no doubt. But those who are holding Israeli citizenships, such as 20% of former Palestinian, like still Palestinian because they belong to the Palestinian people, they have all the right and similar, like not similar, exactly the same rights. Israel, in fact, has a Sharia court, which is an official corpus of the Israeli government. So you cannot tell me that Israel is not a democracy, because it's simply not true.
Gentleman here.
I think there are some misconceptions when it comes to the difference between a freedom movement and a verified terrorist group. I mean, Hamas is 100% a terrorist group. It uses innocent people as shields, as do all the other Islamist groups. They use these strategies because that's what people do in war. They use people as human shields. They hide behind resources and infrastructure that, the government might not be able to verify. Is this place, a school, or is it just propped up to hide a bunch of firearms and weapons? I mean, to a certain degree, yes, Israel is a democracy. There are rights. People have citizenship. But when you look at the fact that there have been, clearly drawn lines that have been violated by Israel to build hundreds and hundreds of luxury homes and accommodations for people who the land didn't belong to, and was clearly stated by the UN that this is the line. This is for the Palestinians, this is for the Israelis, this is how it's supposed to be, and people just decided to pick up their own arms and do whatever they want, which is 90% of the problem in this situation. And the other percent is that there are tons of people who are misinformed about the difference between the Palestinian movement and Hamas, the difference between how Israel approaches, its war on terrorism, which is very valid because Hamas kills lots of people around the world. It is an arm of Iran along with other proxies that Iran owns as well. And I think what we need to do is we need to clarify the murkiness of the water that's been purposely put by all different kinds of sides that want to keep up this conflict.
Thank you very much. Can you pass to the gentleman here? And that's our final question, then I'll come back to the panel for their final remarks.
Okay, hi. So Daniel, you mentioned that Israel is fighting a sort of seven-front war now, right? And I guess there's no dispute, but it's also true that Israel has vastly superior defense and firepower to all of the people that are fighting it. And of the recent volleys of rockets that have been fired into Israel, most of them have been shot out of the sky by the Iron Dome defense system. The same is not true on the other side, right? Like Israel has much more firepower and it's been very effective in attacking other countries, hence the numbers of casualties. So I wondered if you think that the retaliation is a year-on proportionate, and if at what point would it become disproportionate as this conflict sort of grows and grows and grows?
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, panel. Pick what you want from there. Leave us with some final impressions. Perhaps we can all go to the bar and discuss this a bit more. I don't know. Okay, Daniel, we'll start with you, please.
It's like 2 hours, yeah? To answer
yeah, 2 hours.
At the bar.
I mean, maybe just on that to begin with, although it's a big question. Israel is not such a great military power. I mean, I look at, there's a study called the World Firepower Index, and Israel comes in at about 20, and it's not even the biggest military power in the Middle East. You have Turkey, arguably Iran, Egypt. Obviously, it has built up a big military potential relative to the Islamist groups around it, arguably relative to Iran as well, but it's had to, and it's had to make sacrifices. I mean, I think about my uncles, for example, who were nothing special in the Israeli army, just kind of regular, I don't mean like regulars, they were just ordinary soldiers. But in their lives, I worked out they spent about 6 years doing military service. Yeah, about 2 or 3 years full-time military service and reserve duty. Just ordinary Israeli guys. So Israel has built up a relatively big military capacity. That's true, but it's had to survive because it has all these enemies around it.